Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. The elites are desperate to scare you and control you. Don't let them. And they want to do this forever. Only you can stop them. And look at the lengths they'll go. Who's the they? You always got to be careful when someone says they say or they want. Who's the they? We're going to break it down in this segment. The media, the politicians, the bureaucrats, and the scientists. Don't blindly trust them. Let's just review the last 2 days. All right. First, don't trust the media. This is the opening sentence of a CNN story. You ready for this? Vaccination alone won't stop the rise of variants, and in fact, could push the evolution of strains that evade their protection. So the vaccines are making it worse. The vaccines are making the variants. So now make sure you get vaccinated. Everyone needs to be vaccinated, but also the vaccines are what's causing the virus to get even worse. They said people need to wear masks and take other preventative steps until almost everyone is vaccinated, even though they just said it's the vaccination that's causing a push in evolution that evades the protection of the vaccines. Are you with me? This is the Daily Mail, right? Daily Mail freaking out about future variants that don't even exist yet. Scientists say could kill 35% of people that it infects. It would have 1 in 3. SAGE is like, it's like the COVID task force in London. SAGE warns doomsday scenario. It could kill a third of the people it infects. That's the kill rate. So we're gonna go from a virus. You with me? This is the amount of scaremongering, fear-mongering that's going on. Currently, the virus of vaccinated people has a fatality ratio of 0.0004%. 0.0004%. And we're told now that the fatality rate is going to be 35% of what variant? Oh, it doesn't exist yet. But be scared. Be scared as if it does. Does it? No, but it will. Why? Too many people are getting vaccinated. Oh, so what should I do? Definitely get vaccinated. Don't trust the media. Second, don't blindly trust the politicians. Never forget the people telling you to be scared of COVID are not themselves scared of COVID. And the latest of a billion examples is the mayor of DC. She imposed this mask mandate last week, but said, all right, everyone, it's extremely important, it's urgent, it's dire, it's blah, blah, and it goes into effect in 2 days. And the obvious question is, well, why 2 days? This is such an emergency, you don't wait 2 days. Well, it's because in 1 day was her birthday party with Dave Chappelle. And we have pictures of her partying it up, taking pictures, mask-free. You kidding me? But the next day, the mask mandate went into effect. And she was sure to follow it to the highest letter of the law, except for when she officiated a wedding inside that day, the first day. There she is. No masks at this indoor wedding either. That's just the latest. But she'll fine your business. She'll shut you down if you don't wear a mask. But she doesn't have to. These people should go to jail for this stuff. My favorite of all these stories, and there's a ton of them. I mean, Gavin Newsom, obviously, the governor of Michigan was amazing. I think my favorite, though, is Dr. Birx. Remember Dr. Birx? Last Thanksgiving, she was telling everyone, don't go anywhere, don't travel, don't leave your household, all that stuff. And then she got on an airplane and went to Delaware to be with 3 generations of her family from 2 different households at one of her vacation properties. Okay? I'm not kidding. These people should go to jail. Whatever the highest fine and jail time is possible for violating a mask mandate, they should get it immediately. Whatever it is, 6 months in jail, $10,000 fine, whatever it is, they should get the highest letter of the law for breaking their own stupid mandates. Third group, so it's media, politicians. The third is don't trust the bureaucracy. All right, so at the end of last week, it was all about the latest CDC guidelines, right? The most appalling thing, I truly believe the most appalling thing of the entire last year and a half that has been COVID is the fact that these health departments, these great sages and oracles, and brilliant minds of our betters and superiors, won't share the data. They won't release the studies. They won't release whatever they're using to make their conclusions. They won't tell you what it is. I live in California. That was the ultimate reason why I decided to sign the petition to recall Gavin Newsom. I wasn't going to do it just because he's a Democrat. Like, that wasn't enough for me. I needed more than just bad decisions. I needed arrogance and corruption. I needed more even than ineptness, right? Like giving billions of dollars to prisoners for unemployment benefits from COVID, okay? That's inept. I needed even more than that in order to sign the petition. For me, it was Newsom saying to the people of California that we are not going to release the data that we use to come to the conclusion that we need to shut California down or that we need to then ultimately open California up. He wouldn't tell people. And just in case you think I'm making it up, here's the AP headline. This is January 22nd, 2021. California keeps key virus data out of public sight. Okay, because it was too confusing for you to understand. So they decided to just hide it from all of us. Okay, unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. Recall. And the CDC did the same thing with their most recent recommendations. They hid the data. It had to be leaked to the American people like a day or two later to the Washington Post. They refused to release it on their own. And we still listen to these people? Why would you ever listen to a thing they would ever say again? Ever. When they won't even release the information that they're using to come to their guidelines. So now we know some of the studies that they used. Okay, here's two of them. One of them was Providencetown, Massachusetts. Over 4th of July weekend, right? 882 people got infected. Remember, infected doesn't mean sick. Doesn't mean sick. 882 people got infected. 74% of them were vaccinated. 7 of those were hospitalized. And how many people died? 0. Now, the proper response to this study in Providencetown, Rhode Island is, well, that's amazing. Great news. Vaccines work. Look, no one died. Some people got infected. Almost none of them got hospitalized. No one died. Amazing. The vaccines are incredible. Look how safe all these people were in the worst of conditions. In a 4th of July weekend, party, holiday, packed into bars. No one died. That's amazing. That should have been the headline. Also, by the way, when people say they were hospitalized, we don't know the extent of their hospitalization. It could have been someone going to the hospital being like, I don't feel well. I need some fluids, right? And like, oh, they're hospitalized. Okay. And also, I'm not even convinced, based on what we've seen so far out of studies, that these people were hospitalized because of COVID. Right? One of them maybe had appendicitis and they went to the hospital, got tested, and boom, and they got categorized, they got thrown into this whole study, right? But it is crazy to punish the entire nation and maybe keep kids out of school another year because of one outlier situation at a bar over 4th of July weekend where no one died. Ridiculous. The second study that they used is a study out of India, right? But they don't even have the same vaccines we have. So it was this is a study of people in India that have different vaccines. There's no correlation at all. This is from Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He says the study that influenced this decision, it followed healthcare workers who were vaccinated with a vaccine not even approved in the US. So they're not even using a comparable case study that can be applied to vaccinated Americans. And just before the new decision was made, the study's status was mysteriously changed. It's no longer listed as rejected after peer review. This was a study that was rejected in peer review. And now they brought it back. They said it was a glitch. Yeah, it was a glitch. Those are the bureaucrats. Don't trust the media. Like CNN telling you it's future variants that will kill you. Don't trust the politicians. Like the mayor of DC hosting her birthday party without a mask, officiating weddings without a mask. Don't trust the CDC, as they won't release the data that they use to make their mandates, and when they do, it can be debunked in 2 seconds. And finally, don't trust the scientists. I hear people say all the time, you got to trust the scientists. One of my favorite South Park episodes is a while back. Cartman gets teleported into the future, and it's an atheist paradise. There's no more God. So every reference to God is changed to science. It's like, oh, science, help us. Science, darn you! Praise science, hail science! And at one point, one of the characters stubs his toe and says, oh, science H logic! And that's where we're headed today. In the name of almighty science, Paul Graham, venture capitalist, computer scientist guy, he's got 1.3 million Twitter followers. He wrote this tweet the other day. He said, if you think you don't trust scientists, you're mistaken. You trust scientists in a million different ways every time you step on a plane. The fact that you're unaware of this doesn't mean it's not so. Science made your world, whether you realize it or not. Nice try, Paul. Who invented the airplane? You brought up airplane. I didn't bring up the airplane example. You brought up the airplane. Who invented the airplane? Well, of course, Slater, famed scientists from top universities around the world. There was a scientist out of Harvard who everyone believed was going to be the guy who invented the airplane. And New York Times and all these other publications had a reporter follow him everywhere he went as he was on his grand quest. The scientist was to invent the airplane. Was it that guy? No. It was two guys who owned a bicycle shop. The Wright brothers were not scientists. They were engineers. Very different. Let me quote this gentleman, Saifuddin Amos. He said, everything that matters to our modern life, that's their bicycle shop right there, Wright Cycle Company. Everything that matters to our modern life was built by engineers and workers who got their hands dirty. Scientists sat in cushy universities writing textbooks after the fact, indoctrinating generations to think that it was their post hoc explanations that built things. Lord Kelvin, one of the world's most important scientists, when the airplane was invented, he said, I have not the smallest molecule of faith in aerial navigation other than ballooning. Simon Newcomb, 1903, aerial flight is one of the class of problems with which man will never be able to cope. He said that in 1903. What else happened in 1903? Oh, what was it? Oh, yeah, that's right. Two high school dropouts who owned a bicycle shop flew an airplane. 3 years after the Wright brothers flew, the London Times still thought the whole thing was fake. They said all attempts at artificial aviation are not only dangerous to human life, but foredoomed to failure. That was 3 years after. You got to read David McCullough's book, The Wright Brothers, an amazing story. Amazing book. So the deal is, the reason I bring this up is, listen to the scientists. If the Wright brothers had done what Paul Graham says and trusted the scientists, well, then they would have agreed with Kelvin and Newcomb. And they never would have attempted it. New York Times wrote a whole article debunking the possibility of air flight 2 months before these high school dropout bike mechanics did it. Oh, come on, Wright brothers. Why won't you trust the science? Trust the science, Wilbur. Come on, Orville. Trust the science. You're a fool. You're an idiot. What do you know? Trust the science. Follow the science. You know what would get me to trust all these people again? Media, politicians, bureaucrats, scientists. You know what would get me to trust them? Just a drop of humility. I just want like one little bloop of humility. Just one instance of someone in one of those four groups saying, hey guys, so here's the deal. We thought we knew this thing. We thought this was the case. We tested it. Turns out we were wrong. And here's the data. Here's the study we did. Here's the data. So because of that, we're changing our recommendation. Have you heard anything remotely close to that in a year and a half? Anything resembling a dash of humility? Instead, as Kurt Schlichter says, they're wrong all the time. And instead of owning up to it, they treat you like some sort of idiot for noticing. Right? Like you're the bad guy for noticing that Muriel Bowser, the mayor of DC, officiated a wedding after her mask mandate. You're the bad guy. But that's their conceit, that you're an idiot, unable and unworthy to make decisions for yourself. Reject it all. Reject them all. They deserve ridicule and scorn. And when they show a tiny bit of humility, I'll change my tune. Coming up next, I want to talk about how we live in this, we're moving towards, and we'll show you a little bit about what's going on in Sydney and Europe and protest riots in Berlin and Paris, not in America, oddly. But these people across the pond, they understand something that perhaps here in America we don't. It's a little lesson about life that we seem to be forgetting. We'll talk about that coming up next. First, friendly reminder to download our app on your smartphone, in the store, Google, Android, Apple, everywhere. Totally free. And there's the whole gang right there that you get for free. So grateful for you watching us on wherever you are watching us right now. But you don't even have to be tethered to television or your computer when watching us. All of our shows, super easy to use. Everything's right there. All the specials we've done, all the shows, all the top segments. Just scroll, click, plays, boom. Couldn't be easier. Please download that for free in the App Store. More coming up. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, a life caged up, masked up, locked up is not worth living. And people know it. And unfortunately, too many kids have come to that conclusion. Check out this fact. 5 times more kids under 18 have committed suicide than have died of COVID during the lockdown. That's in England. And we know this to be true. We have all these other headlines here. You guys can just pop them up. One teenager in COVID isolation said, I felt like I was suffocating. This goes back to our last segment about the experts, right? Our mental health experts, our health experts in America, medical professionals, thought it would be a good idea to put our kids in back-to-back Zoom meetings for 6 hours a day. 5-year-olds. But kindergartners in front of a screen for 6 hours a day. All years, I've been talking about we got to reduce screen time. And then all of a sudden COVID comes. And it's like, oh, let's just put them in front of screens all day long. How well do you manage with back-to-back Zoom meetings all day? Now imagine you're 8. What's wrong with these people? They think was going to happen. And even the ones who didn't commit suicide didn't come out in the end all right. The LA Times, and I'll give it to him for even printing this editorial, we're actually going to talk to the guy who wrote this tomorrow. I talked to him on my radio show on Friday. He's awesome. We're going to talk to him tomorrow here on the TV show. He wrote an editorial in the LA Times called The Rise of the Zoombies. Not zombies, but Zoombies. Lifeless, detached students have returned to my classroom. Obviously, he's a teacher here. Let me quote this one section here. They're back. It's like, yeah, they're back. They're sitting at their desks, but in many ways, they now embody the detached, lifeless malaise of a hipster zombie, incapable of showing the slightest patina of zest or zeal. This isn't their fault, mind you. They spent the last year in a learning ecosystem that was decidedly not of their choosing, watching Zoom classes, learning through omnipresent pixelated screens that demanded little from them, and in too many instances, taught them even less. He says kids, not only do they not answer your questions as a teacher, they're not present. And he says even worse than that, because kids, some kids don't like school, right? He's like, worse than that, even more disturbing, when the bell rings, he says, my whole teaching career, the bell rings and everyone runs out of their desks into the hallway like the classroom's on fire, right? Or they jump up and they start talking to each other about what's going on this weekend, what happened last weekend, blah, 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 blah. He says the kids don't even talk to each other anymore. They're not communicating with each other face to face. They're not looking at each other. There's no flirting. There's no joking around. There's no, right? It's nothing. The students tell them they've spent 10 hours a day on their cell phones during Zoom classes, just endless scrolling through TikTok videos all year long. Where it's done perhaps permanent damage to their social ability, their ability to be social. Not to mention educationally, right? I mean, we got little kids who never learned their vowels. They never learned how to make vowel sounds because they can't see a teacher's face. Now they're not going to be able to learn how to talk properly or read properly as they grow up. We have kids who took a year of pre-calc over Zoom. They never learned calculus, and now they're going to advance to calculus class. They're never going to get caught up. And I hate this. People say, I'm going to do a segment on this tomorrow. I hate this. People are like, oh, well, kids are resilient. No, not when we've intentionally failed them this bad for this long, they're not. And yeah, they may survive, but at what cost? Many haven't survived. But even the ones who do, with what damage? Kids are resilient. So who's calling the shots here? Who's making these decisions? Who are we following blindly? Like a bunch of dopes. Who's in charge? Well, people like this, unfortunately. She's an anesthetist, which is not an anesthesiologist. It's different. But she said also on her Twitter that she's a associate editor of a medical journal. She says, I'm a vaccinated anesthetist, and this is how I shop for my family. That's how she goes to the grocery store. She wrote this whole blowhardy thing about how she wears her respirator, she uses her hand sanitizer, goggles. She says the rule of the house is only one person can go each day. So husband and wife can't go. They certainly don't go together. No kids ever, which is a travesty for kids. One of the greatest learning experiences a kid can have is going to the grocery store. I send my kids into the grocery store by themselves. I say, here, grab this. Here's your money. They're four and three. Go grab this, and come on out. Here's your money. And they do the whole grocery store by themselves. But to go to the grocery store with your kids is incredibly important. You learn about all the different types of food. You count things. It's really important. And her kids don't have that educational experience anymore. That's a cost. She says she checks in using the QR code furthest away from the front door, sanitizes her hands, races around inside. She says, I assume I have COVID. I assume everyone else has COVID. That's healthy. I shop with laser sharp focus. No browsing. Avoid crowded items. Keep my distance. Get what I need. I do the self-checkout. The furthest one away from other people, of course. And then she leaves. Max 15 minutes in and out. She posted that last week. That wasn't last March. These people have mental illness. So a bunch of other people with mental illnesses chimed in. And they say, oh, when I'm shopping, everything when I come home, when I shop, it gets sanitized. She says it's part of the ritual. Sanitation ritual? What are you talking about? COVID doesn't spread on groceries. It's been a year and a half. The best response was, someone said the moral of the story is that even educated people can be triggered by months of state-sponsored fear-mongering. We have people with mental illnesses dictating life for the rest of us. I'll say it again. We have people with mental illnesses dictating dictating our lives. And they're screwing up our kids. Now, we need to know what's going on in Europe. We need to pay attention. They're a bit ahead of us in Europe. Just a bit. They have vaccine passports. They're a bit ahead of us with the vaccine mandates. Don't worry, it's coming here. We had some protests in Berlin this weekend. Things getting pushy. But don't worry, this is Sydney. Let me quote, Sydney is a local newspaper in Australia. The army has been called into Sydney to enforce compliance with the city's lockdowns, as health experts warn that record numbers of mystery cases and people failing to isolate while infectious raises the risk of Sydney's COVID-19 outbreak spiraling out of control. There's like 200 cases a day in Australia. Okay. The police commissioner, 300 Australian Defence Force personnel have been sent to Sydney to enforce the government's strict public health orders, following concern that too many people were failing to comply with the rules. This is a real-life Chiron in Australia. Look at this. Telling you to keep your distance. It says parents need to keep distance from their children. That's what it says. Parents need to keep their distance from their children. But like I said, they're only a little bit ahead of us. Our Surgeon General, Biden's Surgeon General, suggested that vaccinated parents wear their masks in their homes around their unvaccinated children. People have lost their minds. We got some more video here. Paris. Protest. Gatherings. Well, that's police. That's a police attack on a business. There's hundreds of thousands of people rallying across France. There's been pushback in France. Why no pushback here? Will the people of America ever really stand up and stop the nonsense? Or are we going to let the bureaucrats and the mentally ill tell us what's best for us? We used to believe in freedom. It was nice while it lasted. A life without freedom is not much of a life at all. And I want to end here with two clips. First, from our friend Spencer Clavin, who was on our special last week. Our special on Friday was about big tech. And I asked him, in this conversation, we got talking about these big tech billionaires who are obsessed with trying to keep people alive forever, whether it's keep your consciousness in the AI world, or even literally changing our cells in order for people to live forever. And I said, what's motivating that? And here's what Spencer said.
The fact of death is the great tragedy of the world. There's really, the answer to this is not oh, it's so great that we die, right? It's not. It's a terrible tragedy, and the traditional Christian understanding of it is that it's the great consequence of the fall, right? And so the first thing is that, the idea that they're going to extend life so far that is gone, right? And one of the things we've learned over the past year is that if you try to do that, you actually just make life not worth living, right? I mean, that's what COVID taught me, at least, that if you try to extend life at the cost of everything else, at the cost of going outside, at the cost of seeing people, then it slips from your hand because you don't actually have life. You just have this weird, sad existence where, again, your brain is on Zoom, essentially.
This is the great Neil Oliver across the pond. He's a Scottish anthropologist.
English writer Mervyn Peake said, "To live at all is miracle enough." It's a good line. To live at all is miracle enough. And I've quoted it for years. But now I see that merely to live is not enough. Not nearly. A caged bird is alive, but without the freedom to fly in the limitless sky, it is denied everything that makes it a bird in the first place. To be alive is not enough. What matters is to live in freedom. A bird is such a fragile creature. It's really all and only about movement. Take away a bird's movement and it's a handful of feathers and air. Freedom is not negotiable. You're either free or you're not. Freedom is not even safe. Those who've been imprisoned are often terrified of freedom, all those choices, all of that personal responsibility. This is why ex-cons often reoffend, so they can go back behind bars where it feels safer, out of harm's way.
I'm going to put that whole video on MikeSlater.locals.com. What we've done to our kids, what we've done to our country, what they're doing in Australia and Europe, and what will surely come here to America unless we put a stop to it yesterday. What are we doing to ourselves? And over what? True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.
Wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better. And
masks are protective,
but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
Mark, there has not been any indication that putting a mask on and wearing a mask for a considerable period of time has any deleterious effects.
There are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course.
You do not need to wear a mask indoors if, in fact, you've been vaccinated. Good that you're vaccinated, but in a situation where you have people indoors, particularly crowded, you should wear a mask.
Tremendous. Absolutely fantastic. The lack of, as we talked about in the last segment, or the first segment, the lack of transparency and the lack of humility has been astounding throughout this entire last year and a half. And we can't let people forget it, which is why I'm grateful for Drew Holden. And you've read him on every great conservative a magazine and website that's out there, who did a great compilation of all the flip-flops from King Fauci. Drew, how are you, brother?
Mike, appreciate you having me on, sir. I'm doing well.
Yeah, good to talk to you, bro.
I'm tired of hearing Fauci's voice, I'll be honest with you, but otherwise I'm doing great.
No, I agree with that, man. Let me share this quote from Fauci. This should be the end of Fauci. I hear the masks. Back then, he didn't want to cause a run on masks. If he wants to make up that excuse about his original thing, okay. This one's out of control. He said this, I'm quoting from the New York Times. When polls said only about half of Americans would take a vaccine, I was saying herd immunity would take 70 to 75%. Then when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I can nudge this up a bit. So I went to 80, 85. What are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about the lack of humility, right? It seems that Fauci's whole bent, the CDC's whole bent here is, how can we do our best to give all of the control, right? All of the ways that we can manipulate the ways that people think and feel based on the data that we have. For the longest time, we talked about follow the science, the importance of trusting the science, why all of our decision making should be anchored around science. And yet you have the lead scientist in the United States saying time and time again, this has never been wedded to the science. This has never been driven by the science. It is the tail wagging the dog at best. And that's all we've seen throughout the last 18 months.
Wow. What do you think motivates the people who, there's a lot of people involved here. Well, let me start with Fauci and them. Let's start with them. Let's start with the top.
Yeah.
What motivates their actions, their pronouncements, what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it's probably two things. So one, I think there's a little bit of almost a mental sunk cost thing going on. They've given this guidance for so long that they've almost tricked themselves into believing that it has to be the God's truth, right? This has to be 100% bulletproof. And as soon as they flinch from saying the same thing time and time again, even as the evidence changes, it's going to destroy their credibility. And I think a lot of really what's driving it is that it's that sense of, well, we've been saying it all along, we just got to keep saying it. And then that secondary factor of these people are worried that they're going to lose the credibility and their ability to tell people what to do and have them listen and respond. I think a lot of it is, I don't want to read too much ill intent into what they're saying, but I think these people really do believe that if everyone in the world just listened to me, Dr. Fauci, other folks at the CDC, if everyone would just listen, we'd all be better off. And so they're horrified at the prospect that something could happen that would lead them to lose that credibility, even if it's their own mistake.
Yeah, those are so absolutely true. There's these people, I don't know who you want to pick. I'm in California, so Newsom is my go-to guy. Loves COVID, loves it, loves the daily press conferences, loves the executive orders, loves the people, oh, you're so brilliant, you're saving lives, oh, you're a hero, just loves this whole last year and a half and doesn't want to let it go. So then the next thing is, what leads the people who keep falling for it? we talked about I'm sure you saw the Twitter earlier, the woman who said, I'm an anesthetist and this is how I go to the grocery shopping every day. Like, what leads that person to follow lockstep these people?
It's a great question. I think the biggest motivating factor across the board is fear. I think people are genuinely, whether or not they have any reason to be, they are horrified. They see the numbers and they say, wow, thousands, millions of people around the world have died from this thing. It's got to be terrible. Forget that 99.5% of people survive it. That's not what I think resonates with people. It's all of these people are dying and I can't let that happen to me. And even if it's a tiny, tiny risk, that's too much for me to be able to go and do something. I think that's one. Two, and to me, especially as I live in Washington, D.C., so I think I probably see more of this than most people. I think a lot of people really like to play hall monitor. A lot of people really enjoy the newfound powers of tattletale that they've had over the last 18 months. And particularly in a town like DC, where you have every high school's lead tattletale probably got a job somewhere in this city when they graduated. All of them. That's what runs this town, right? People talk about how politics is Hollywood for ugly people. I don't think so. I think it's kind of just Hollywood for tattletales and nerds. And so what you've done is you've had all of these people who for the last 18 months have not just had a sense of internal moral superiority, they've gotten to be scolds. They've gotten to go out and tell people and harass them and look down on them. And they've had moral license to do that for 18 months. I think they really liked it. I think they really enjoyed the opportunity to not just feel, but talk and act that way. And I don't think they want to give it up. And I think wearing a face mask or not being able to do their favorite activities, whatever that kind of self-sacrifice that has to go in it for these people, it's worth it for the license to do that.
Yeah, you're right. We did, I forget what month it was, but, and I forget the number off the top of my head, sorry, but it was, in England, it was a certain number of snitches, calls to police about people breaking COVID protocols. And we did the math and it was 5 a minute. We got 5 a minute.
It's unbelievable. But
again, every 12 seconds, someone's calling.
Yeah, I mean, but this is just like, I don't know, it reminds me of the Inquisitions back in the Middle Ages, right? It's so easy to get worked up into a state of like almost bloodlust over this kind of stuff. And if you really believe, and if you really believed for 18 months that you're the good guys, that you're the right moral actors, then having to look in the mirror and say, oh no, maybe there's something that I'm doing that's not good, that doesn't compute. And neither does changing your strategy when you're this far along in flight.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so you did your famous Twitter thread about Fauci flip-flops. The mayor of DC, we talked about her in the first segment, her latest actions. Like, what are we, and add her to the list, right? There's a million of these. What are we doing? I don't want to exaggerate. Like, she should resign in shame / be like, whatever the harshest penalty is for breaking a COVID protocol, right? The mayor should get it, no?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely, right. Isn't that how we set standards? Isn't that how we hold people, particularly people in power, to account? Yeah, I mean, it's insane, right? I think there were 52 cases in DC. That was what led her to take this change. There have been 2 deaths in the previous 2 weeks. The other interesting fact, so she's got this dashboard, red, yellow, green. And the only reason we had tripped into red and required the masks, based on our own numbers, right? These aren't my numbers. These are the mayor's numbers. What set us over was the Texas Democrat. And the fact that they were here, they were probably counting against us. And more importantly, they were leading to more cases in Speaker Pelosi's office, in the White House's office. And so she enacts these new mask rules, and it doesn't make any sense, right? And like, I think the thing that really kills me with all the hypocrisy you see from Mayor Bowser, from Governor Newsom, is that if these people actually believed for one lick that any of this actually did any good, if it really kept people safe, then these people would just do it. If it's so small of an ask, then why does Mayor Bowser why isn't she willing to wear a mask when she's sitting at an indoor wedding? And she comes out with a statement about how it was outside, right? You can see it's not outside. She's not on a rooftop or outside in these pictures. She's indoors. It's just that she doesn't care. And she's been able to live for the last 18 months saying things without anyone holding her to account. I mean, at least as of this morning, the Washington Post, the local paper down here, they hadn't mentioned it, right? The mayor of our city has broken her own ordinance within 12 hours of putting it out, and no one cares. No one's interested in talking about it. And so I think part of it is she knows she can keep doing this, and she can keep looking like she's tough on coronavirus. She cares about her people. Look at her taking all this action, and then no one's going to hold her account if she's not interested in doing it herself.
Yep. Newsom did the same thing at first with the French Laundry. He said the party was outside, and then the pictures came out, and whoops. Drew Holden 360. Follow him on Twitter. Drew, appreciate your work. Thank you, brother.
Mike, pleasure's mine. Thank you, sir.
Have a great day, man. Drew Holden, Holden, Drew Holden 360. All right, coming up next, we'll talk about NPR and their latest policy on what their reporters are allowed to do off company time. I'll tell you about this next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Crusaders, breaking news, the media is liberal. They have a slight liberal bias in the stories they cover and the way they cover them. I know it's shocking. You had no idea. It was hard to find one example, but here's a nice little question from an NPR reporter.
Representative Waters, as you said, clarified. She said, my actual words don't matter. I wonder why the White House isn't also coming to the defense of Representative Waters, given the fact that she's now facing an onslaught of attacks, especially by, I would say, Republicans. I wonder why the White House isn't saying, we back what she said about being confrontational. She was obviously not threatening violence. There are civil rights leaders that are saying that's what civil rights is to be confrontational, to be active.
Is that Biden's lawyer? What do we? What kind of question is this? My favorite though is Mr. Vice President, what flavor did you get? Jarrett Stepman is here from the Daily Signal, of course, with Heritage Foundation. Jarrett, how are you, brother?
I'm doing great. It's good to be on.
Man, good to talk to you. So, tell us what NPR just announced they're allowing their reporters to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. This actually happened over the last week that NPR changed its ethics policies to essentially allow reporters to engage in activism, whether it's on social media or more direct activism as far as going to protests. They say it's for causes that relate to the dignity of human beings, however they may define that. I thought, well, they're finally letting their reporters be pro-life here and go to a March for Life protest. I don't think that's actually what they're getting at here. It's quite a change for NPR to essentially say something that I think many who've listened to their programming in the last few years say essentially you can now simply engage in outright activism, despite the fact that it portrays itself as a straight news organization. These reporters are covering issues supposedly objectively, yet at the same time allowed to essentially go on Twitter or go to protests and be very open about what their views are. I think that's quite a change. I think it shows how many newsrooms around the country, certainly many liberal ones, are openly becoming activist organizations. Again, we kind of knew this already about them, but now they're openly embracing it. They're just saying simply, we're going to allow our reporters, straight news reporters, to go out there and engage in activism if they want to.
Yeah, and don't forget, of course, taxpayer funded. I'm trying to look at the progressives' perspective on this. Like, what are the progressives at NPR? What is their argument as to why they should be allowed to more directly engage in activism on and off company time vocally?
I mean, they're saying essentially that some causes are just too important to be left to objectivity, that it's essentially, especially in the case of what they said was Black Lives Matter, these kind of causes, that you can't really continue to keep the veil of objectivity in these cases. You have to allow reporters to engage in the activism that they believe in. Again, I actually think it very much undermines something that has been a very powerful thing for these organizations, which is to have that veil of objectivity, saying, look, in the past, New York Times, Washington Post, NPR certainly have kind of hidden behind this cloak that, no, we're just straight reporting the news. These are just the objective facts. We stand for facts, nothing else. If anything, this kind of blows the message a little bit and saying essentially, no, actually, we're just going to let our people be activists. They're just going to go out there on Twitter and say what they want and reveal to the public just how strong their bias really is. And I think that's really what's going to happen here is they're going to be more that simply you're going to know, hey, these reporters, they're not just straight reporting the facts. They are activists engaging in activism with their stories and with essentially what they do on the daily basis.
Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder if this fits into something. I've heard a couple examples of this lately, where it's the very millennial-ish concept where I'm obviously the most important, the world revolves around me. My voice, my activism, you can't deny it to me, NPR. Where maybe back in the day it was, oh, I work for NPR. NPR is an institution, it's an idea, it's a place, it has meaning, it's important, and I'm going to be submissive to it, if you will, for the sake of its overall mission. Right? But it's not, now it's me, and I get to do whatever I want. I should always do whatever I want, no matter who I work for. I wonder if there's something, that's just another example of that. Because back in the day, that wasn't the case. Back in the day, if you were a reporter, you wouldn't also go march in rallies and write about it, right?
Absolutely not. I think it's the breakdown of professionalism from these institutions, too. I think that we're seeing a lot of that where something that I think existed a generation ago, even when there was bias, there was this belief that, no, we're going to be professionals. I believe in my job as a journalist and reporter, that it requires me to at least make an attempt at objectivity in how I cover stories. That, in fact, gives my organization a level of credibility with the public, of people from different sides of the political spectrum. They're essentially dropping that veil. They're saying essentially, no, actually, we're going to be activists now. Everybody knows what our bias is, so we're just going to roll with that. We're going to drop the professionalism. I think you're seeing it absolutely with how the media has operated and behaved, certainly since 2016. I think it is just a case that many of our mainstream big institutions of journalism are simply engaging now in activism at the expense of, I think, was a certain level of professionalism from reporters and journalists. And of course, those who still are trying to be professionals and still are trying to be objective are being attacked in these organizations by the activists who say, no, you all have to bow before the new gods and this get aboard the crusade now or else you may get fired.
And they get undercut as well. Yep. Jarrett Stepman, Heritage Foundation, the book's The War on History. Jarrett, appreciate you, brother. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
True story. Mike Slater, we'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word.